I think they're ready to go. Thank you.
Well, let's get started, shall we? Well, morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Greater Norwich Growth Board meeting. This is actually my last meeting chairing the board, so I'm going to just say thank you to everybody, members and officers, for the work that's been put in over the last year I've chaired the board. I think we recognise as well that the big issue, and it will remain the big issue as well, is financing the big projects that we've got in mind for the future. So I've done this before. I'll hand over the chair now to Alan Waters. So over to you, Alan.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and thank you for your year as chair. Welcome everybody to the meeting. So confirmation. Okay, no declarations of interest. Let's go on to the minutes. Are we happy to approve the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of March, as well as the exempt minute for this meeting, which is agenda item 10? Happy to do that. Okay, and let's move on then to item 5, which is the meatiest of the documents today, the Greater Norwich Infrastructure Plan 2021. Phil, you're going to lead on this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to speak for any great length of time, certainly not proportionate to the length of the report. You have seen this document every year previous to this. It is effectively the baseline document. It is the very long list of the infrastructure aspirations and needs in order to support growth as we go into the future. It is this document from which projects are drawn in order to form the 5-year investment plan, and from that into the annual growth programme. So it is always seen as a cascade, and this provides that long list, the pool of projects from which those other key delivery documents are informed. So every year you look at the GNIP, and it is effectively the starting blocks. It is the start of the process for future allocations of projects and funding. So it is therefore a very long list because we have huge aspirations for the growth in this area. There are a lot of projects in there. You are asked, as you have done previously, to recommend to accept that draft GNIP and also accept that initiates the start of the process to call for projects for infrastructure investment funding as again we move forward. It is just worth noting that as we go through the proposed adoption process for the Greater Norwich Local Plan, in paragraphs or in section 4 of the report before you, there is a proposal to review the GNIP. Effectively, we are looking to move forward in a more, certainly in a more visually and digitized format, but also looking at it, is this what we want to do? Does the GNIP needs to be broadened out even further? It is very much focused on 4 key themes at the moment, which is education, transport, community and green infrastructure. Does that need to be broadened out further? So it is intended to review the GNIP this year, and it is likely to look different next year. But even so, for this year, you have the recommendations in front of you, which I've already described. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Very concise presentation of the key points, and we note the future related issues in paras 41 and 42. John, you're first, and then Andrew.
Yes, thanks. All on your microphone. Can you hear me? Yep, good. Okay, so the thing here, this is a infrastructure plan. I don't quite ready to publish yet. For example, I mean, we haven't got a section. The man in the street who may want to pick this up off the website has no idea, looking at this document, how much money we are already committing between 2021 and 2026. Still less, what headroom there might be, and what candidate sites there are that might be considered ready to go, because the appendix is littered with things saying, well, this is a bit aspirational, and I just don't think there's nothing wrong with the report, and the content of the report per se, but there's nothing to help the man in the street navigate or get an idea of the quantum or priorities that we've got here. It's simply a dumb list. Now, there's nothing wrong with dumb lists, for our own internal consumption, but we need to help and guide the casual reader there. So that's my first point. I think we just need to go through and make it absolutely clear. These projects are already in our existing 5-year plan. They're committed. These ones potentially could be in. These ones are just sort of aspirational. We hope we're going to get there eventually, but we might not. With summary data in the covering report. So people, I mean, I can't tell you from this report how much money we're spending on infrastructure next year. I think it's a matter of public record that we should be really clear and actually proud of that. So I think it needs, before we can get further and to publish this, and I'm not suggesting it needs to come back, because I think the base content is there, but it just needs a better narrative around that spend. Then secondly, if I may, Chairman, just one point, everyone else's country park seems to be in there, but the Cossey Country Park isn't in there, and that's an omission. The land is already identified. It's as a result of the Queen's Hills development. It just needs to be formalised. It's in the plan. It's in the plan, so it should be in the plan. So, and that's what I went through. So there are just 2 points there, really. But I do think we need to consider beyond this narrow group, the man in the street may be looking at this, and they're just going to want to know quite how much we're digging deep into infrastructure stuff. And we're not at the moment.
There may be some women interested as well. Phil, did you want to respond to that at the moment? I think John's made some helpful points there, and of course, there is a process which, if we agree this report, then starts to identify the particular areas that we want to invest in. But I will just take an opportunity on the back of what John has said around, the significant investments that we've done over the period and things that are up and running, that I'd like to reinstate something I did the last time I was chair, which is to have some of the Greater Norwich projects come forward just to tell us, what the investment has done, what it's meant, the benefit of the community as well. And I know we stepped back from that because of COVID and so on, but I think there's an opportunity to kind of just show what has been done by this partnership over the period. So I think that links to some of John's points about exemplifying what's being invested in and what's going forward. And yes, Phil.
Yeah, sorry, just to respond very quickly. John makes a very good point about Cossey Country Park. That is something that is being transferred very soon, and we would want to see further investment into that. So absolutely, I think I'll talk with Grace and see if we can get that included if it's not already listed in there, as I don't think it is. Just in terms of that general point about the purpose of the GNIP, on page 16, paragraph 1.9 of the appendices, it does say, this does not seek to review or prioritise agreed infrastructure, but it's a means of refreshing and managing the strategic programme. It is that base document, and in terms of the delivery plan, this isn't a delivery plan in its own right. It is that long list. The delivery plan is in the 5-year infrastructure investment plan, and then subsequently the annual growth programme. It is that, as I said, the starting blocks for the allocation process of funds through the year. In terms of spend profiling, again, the GNIP, albeit recognised somewhat indicatively in some cases, does highlight the years in which spend or projects are intended to be delivered. Not all of those, in fact, a number of those are not through the Greater Norwich programme, may well be through other programmes as well. So that would be my initial response to some of the points that Councillor Frewer has made.
Thanks, Phil. Very helpful. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. It was just really on the detail of that. The appendix has got a huge number of projects in there, so capturing the total of that might be useful, because I can see the costs all broken down and the spend projected for years, but it's that sort of thing that may be worth a summary. Just one small point of detail on page 103, relation to the Strumpshaw neighbourhood plan, that community and village hall is actually up and running now, so that can be ticked off, so to speak. And just one other comment about should there be anything encouraging bids to do with flood alleviation. Now we're talking quite a lot about this these days, and there will be places in and around in Greater Norwich where some money ought to be allocated towards it for some of the alleviation work. So just whether that ought to be flagged up in some way.
Phil, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think there's a consensus that there can be some further summaries within this document, as both Councillor Fuller and Councillor Proctor have said. Again, very happy to try to facilitate that in this document. In terms of flood alleviation, it's important to note that we shouldn't be using SIL to mitigate existing problems. So I think if we're looking at mitigation as we move forward, then to support growth and the growth agenda, then absolutely. Now, there's a subtle difference in that. I suppose all I'm simply highlighting is that we shouldn't be going back to retrofit and mitigate existing problems through this process, but we can look forward and say we think there may be an exacerbation of an existing problem through growth or a new problem through growth. And absolutely, I think, as I said in my introduction to this, the GNIP is something that we will be reviewing this year. And I think if we can include that consideration within that review, then that would be a good thing.
Well, I'd be happy with that as a sort of process looking at it. There was no intention to go back and say, well, that's a local problem, sort it out through the GNIP, far from it. But you're right, Phil, we need to look at the sites or any form of development that can't be brought forward or is constrained because of flooding issues and see what can be done about that.
John, did you want to come in again? Or is that a legacy hand?
I'm afraid that is a legacy hand, but if you do press me though, on page 22, there's a little there's a little growth program process. I thought I'd leave an easy one for Andrew, but he hasn't picked it up. And whilst I accept that the planning authorities are the are the decision makers here, again, the man in the street would expect, or the woman on the bus would expect to see the Norfolk County Council sort of included in that diagram somewhere, and in the extreme is possibly even the Broads Authority. But if we're talking about flooding, so I think that the process diagram candidly should include the county, even if it's just a dotted line or a dotted orbit, on the basis that it's the planning authority that ultimately sign this off.
Yeah, sure, we can put a dotted line to the county. That would be fine. Sean, did you have any comment to make on this report at all? Just thought I'd ask.
Thank you, Alan. I've got nothing further to add. I think that the report is weighty in its standing. It's what we've seen for a number of years. I think the review of it will refresh and perhaps enable us to take it forward in a slightly different way. And that would fit in with some of the things that both John and Andrew have said. So I think that gets us into a good place with it, and we should just take it forward as it stands at the moment, in doing the job that it does. So I've got nothing further to add at this point. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. So if there are, Phil, further comment from you?
No, sorry, Chair. Again, just for the purpose of the clarification, I think Councillor Fuller earlier said happy to see some changes being made along the lines that's been discussed, but this board doesn't need to see this paper again beforehand.
Well, that's the chair and vice chair,
do we have the team have
the summaries are there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right. Any further comments from anybody? No. Are we then happy to accept the recommendations at the top of page 9? Yeah. Please indicate the consensus. Yes.
Yes, agree.
Good. Okay. Thanks very much. It's a very solid piece of work. A lot of time has gone into that, and you and your team, Phil. So thanks very much. Let's move on then to page 107, which is the Greater Norwich Sports and Physical Activity Strategy. I think that's over to you, Graham, isn't it?
Indeed it is. Thank you very much, Alan. I'll keep this suitably brief in terms of the presentation. It's really just an update report that's come through, because members may recall that back in September you had quite a lengthy presentation and full debate on the potential for a sports and physical activity strategy from Simon Hamilton of Active Norfolk, who's closely involved in this project. And the key thing to note is that a lot of previously the funding and the investment that's come via the Greater Norwich Growth Board has gone into particular facilities to support sports activity, and over the years some of the methodology that particularly Sport England are promoting around this now seeks to recognise far more the benefits of active lifestyles as much as physical participation in actual sport. And the purpose of the study is to try and get somewhat ahead of the curve so we can better align future funding with the funding that comes through from bodies such as Sport England, and mean that we can take a slightly broader approach to considering how to invest in infrastructure that actually improves the quality of life and the life outcomes of the residents. So it's relatively cutting edge stuff. Following the presentation and the strong steer from the board that you gave last time that you actually wanted to push ahead with this, we have made available the funds from our own funds to take forward effectively 50% of the study. We have approached and succeeded in getting matched funding to match that from Sport England, who are closely involved in it. We've set up the appropriate working groups to ensure that all the members of the councils with an interest are involved in it, and the engagement processes will follow from there. And we've been through the procurement piece and awarded the contract to FMG Consulting, who are leading it in accordance with the timetable that is set out in the report and with the governance processes that are covered off in the appendix. So it's really just to let you know that that study is now well underway, and that's the timetable. And as that proceeds, we'll report back draft results and where that's taking us before that report is finally signed off. But it's just really that update on where we are. So that's all we needed to say.
Okay, good news story. Any comments on this? Okay, so we're just asked basically an update on where things have got to. Things are moving in the right direction. Thanks to the with additional thanks to the Norfolk County Council procurement team that are mentioned in this report and the work that's gone into this. So good stuff to come, I think. So are we happy to accept the recommendation of this report, which is really to note progress? Trevor, did you want to come in?
Can I just raise a point? I just wondered whether it was worth cross-reference between this report and the previous one. So under page, I should have picked up on the previous item, but on page 31 where it talks about health, whether there's the opportunity to cross-reference to show that the two things are joined up in the way that Graham just described around using infrastructure to promote healthy lifestyles.
Whether it's certainly worth doing. I mean, one of the purposes of doing this report now is that, as Phil mentioned, we're due to review the structure and the content of the GNIP more fully, because as you're aware, we've got the Greater Norwich local plan going through, revised growth proposals, different guidance, and we need to sort of make sure we stay ahead of the curve in terms of delivering it. I think the more significant impacts about this study is it's going to come forward to a timing that means that those updates arising from it and that refreshed evidence base will fully be able to inform the next iteration of the Greater Norwich investment plan. I'm not sure there's any deficiency in what we're doing that needs to be picked up in either document now, but frankly, if there's a reference that needs to be added in some of those minor clarifications to the GNIP that we spoke about earlier, that I'm sure we'll be able to appropriately refer to that in the sports study, the sports and physical activity study, informing future iterations of it, just for clarity.
Chairman.
Okay, let's make that an action point. You okay with that, Trevor?
Chairman, thank you.
Okay, great. Any other comments at all? Okay, can we accept the recommendations, please? Yep. Excellent, thank you very much. Right, let's go on to the last item. Is Harvey in the room today? He's presenting this, or somebody else? Oh, Harvey is there. Hello, Harvey.
Hello. Thank you, Chair.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Just a few things from me. I think this report is seeking to maximise the benefits of the city deal, and in particular, I think my understanding is the original intention was for the lift part of the city deal was not intended to be funded by SIL repayments. This paper is suggesting that a change in that way, in order to ensure that the city deal is fully utilised. And I suppose one of the key issues that's highlighted in the report is that the city deal definition of infrastructure is much wider than what the SIL legislation enables to the SIL receipts to be used for repayment, and what this paper is suggesting a mechanism whereby we can generate a recyclable pot where that then can be used for wider definitions of used for wider definitions of SIL, and therefore meet the requirements and the aspirations as set out in the original city deal. So I think that's the key change in terms of the approach, in terms of recommendation 2, and in terms of the third recommendation, officers have already met to start that process to ensure that there is a mechanism that we can bring back to the board that will ensure that we can draw down the funding for the benefit of Norfolk residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. Right. Comments, questions, John?
Yeah, hi, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm looking, but I mean, I was one of there aren't many of us left nowadays, but I'm one of the people who actually signed this city deal along with the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, at a little ceremony we had at the Genome Analysis Centre about nearly 10 years ago, and I've still got all my paperwork because I'm sad like that. So I think it's really important, and I also sat on the SIL review, so I've got more than just passing knowledge of some of this stuff. Of course, in Greater Norwich, the success of this board is that uniquely we are still the only entity within the whole SIL universe for which we are permitted to borrow against future SIL income. It is specifically, prevented by regulation, and the reason we can do that is because of the city deal. We have a bespoke SIL regulation within the whole ambit of SIL regulations, and we should always look to our contract. So we have, if you like, a super piece of agreement. I'm not sure whether the lawyers even knew that or were apprised of it. Of course, and on paragraph 2, I have no problem at all with spending SIL on roads, flood defences, schools, medical, sports and other open spaces, as is set out in paragraph 2. But I think explicitly, when this money gets repaid, it must also be contemplated that, and I've sent the notes round, and I'll put the relevant thing on the chat as well, to open up housing or employment related development. And I think that's really important. We don't lose sight of that. I've been around long enough to know that when we recycle this money in due course, people will go back to this particular paper and they'll go, back in June 2001, they said it could only be spent on those 6 things. Well, that's not the purpose of the money given in the first place. It was to, as it says now in the chat, which is a direct copy and paste from the deal we had with government. We can borrow it round and to use to open up housing or employment development. So to proceed, I would suggest that in one of the recommendations, and whether it's in 2 or 3, I'm pretty relaxed, but it is over and above the normal SIL, the SIL headings themes, roads, flood defences, schools, and so forth, we also explicitly state that the city deal agreement between ourselves and government, which provided the source of funds which we are now applying, is also to be used to support infrastructure required to open up sites for housing or economic development. They're not my words, they're the words of the government. They're the words of the deal, the agreement, the contract, if you will. And this paper before us needs to be amended to reflect that deal, because without accepting that, we shouldn't have the money in the first place.
Okay, thank you, John. Harvey, did you want to just come back on that? Because my understanding of the current situation, and I think you expressed it very clearly, is that by pulling down the remaining £20 million, that gives us more flexibility in terms of investable opportunities than the more restricted SIL. Now, I'm not disagreeing with John about since he has all the documentation.
Well, I'm after exemplification.
Sorry. Yes,
I was really after an exemplification rather than the challenge.
Yeah, which just raises a point in my mind. Have we as yet had any discussions, any necessary discussions with the Treasury?
We haven't had any discussions with the Treasury. I think the issue for this is that the city deal is very clear, and what Councillor Fuller said is exactly right. I think the original intention was that the LIF element was not repaid from SIL, but what that would require in the short term, until those schemes started repaying the money, is an alternative funding source. And what has been missing to date is that alternative funding source, i.e. because as soon as the money is drawn down, normally within a PWLB type loan, after 6 months, you'd have to at least start repaying interest. And the GNGB would need to identify that initial funding sources until those housing employment sites were in position to start repaying that loan and creating that revolving fund as originally envisaged in the city deal. And what this paper seeks to do is to address that issue and find a way forward to enable that to happen. And that's what this is trying to achieve. So I don't dispute for one moment that what was in the original city deal and the intention, but it is really just trying to find a mechanism and a funding sources to deliver what was originally set out in the city deal, and that's what this paper seeks to do. The changes suggested by Councillor Fuller is fine, but it will come back to the GNGB will need to find an alternative funding source if it wishes to push ahead and not use SIL to repay that in the short term. So it is a funding issue.
Can I just clarify that? I have no objection to the proposal as it is. What I'm trying to do is anticipate the policies that we will implement when we start to recycle the money. So I'm looking forward 2 to 3 years, and I want to make sure that this paper, so when in 2 or 3 years' time, when we now look back at what were the ground rules we set, the ground rules include, for the recycling element, open up sites for housing or employment development. So du jour, as of today, I'm happy with where we are, but it's always useful to think, well, what next? And that's where I want to focus, so we don't, in 2 or 3 years' time, arbitrarily and wrongly restrict ourselves to the 6 thematic areas in paragraph 2.
Okay, John. So that'll be that observation will be minuted. Clearly, what the recommendation, and you're happy with the recommendations as they currently stand. This is some more work will be done in the period leading up to our next meeting at the end of September, as outlined in recommendation 3. Are there any other comments about this? Are we okay?
Well, so Chairman, if I may, I don't wish to prolong matters further, but what I'm suggesting is either a new recommendation 4 or just some words added into the recommendation that make it clear that upon recycling, sites that open up sites for housing or employment development will also be acceptable. There's going to be a lot of change on SIL regs coming up in the next few months. That will make it abundantly clear. So it's a modification or an amplification of the thing, because otherwise we are going to forget what the money was given to us for. And I want to make sure that the City Deal stuff is accurately reflected.
Okay, right, I'll take some more comments. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I get what John's saying. I suppose that the issue now is I thought we'd sort of moved on from what the original LIF was for, because it wasn't being taken up, and particularly in the context of being able to be repaid from SIL makes it somewhat more constrained, which is where we are. So if we're now talking about something different, then, unless my understanding of this is totally wrong, I thought we were using that £20 million for those particular areas of infrastructure listed, and it does say to include as opposed to restricted to, because of the SIL repayment mechanism.
Once we've repaid it, it's our money, but they're not bound by SIL.
Yeah. Okay, let's just take some other comments. And Phil and then Trevor. You're muted, Bill.
Sorry, schoolboy error. I think just the point that Councillor Fuller is making is that sense of, once we have recycled the money, we have a new pot, and at present we don't have a governance framework for that new pot. And there is some benefit, whether it's under recommendation 3 or whether it's a new recommendation, simply saying that that governance framework will be established, but that should be consistent with the original, those exact words, to support infrastructure required to open up sites for housing or employment. But it is that sense of there is a slight vacuum, which I absolutely recognise, with the governance of that recyclable pot in due course. As I say, it could be dealt with by just tweaking recommendation 3 or having that separate recommendation in there.
That's helpful, Phil. So we'll hold that thought for a moment. Trevor?
Yeah, Phil got there before me. I think actually everyone can be seen to be served by the kind of approach that Phil's recommended. And it doesn't, we just need to not constrain the thinking of ourselves in the future or the thinking of anyone who replaces us.
I think that's sufficiently. Andrew, you want to come in?
Just quickly, really, because probably the easiest way in terms of recommendations is to have the new recommendation is number 2, and then what is now number 2 becomes number 3, and it could be worded agree that the initial infrastructure fund should be repaid from the borrowing agreement, something like that. So you've got the words initial in there, and then that sort of covers off for the future. Just a thought.
Okay.
Sounds sensible.
Are we comfortable with that as an approach? Vince, welcome. Hello.
Hello. Just a quick one. Do we just need to? I mean, I think the assumption there is that effectively it's not SIL anymore, and it becomes a different type of a fund. Do we just need to just double check before we go and ask for that is in fact the correct interpretation?
Yeah, Graham, and then Phil.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, recommendation 3 talks about working up a particular detailed model to do it through. Once you've done that, you'll have an idea of what the rate of repayment into a new pot is, and how can I put it? I take from the debate that members wish us to investigate actually getting that recycling pot and investigating the options for to allow it to be used as widely as possible and not be constrained by the SIL regs. But it seems to me there's a process, we've got a timetable around it, and we probably need to flesh out and have that negotiation with HMT and work out what the detail of 3 looks like before we can finalise the governance of the recyclable pot and what it may be used for, because certainly I'd be uncomfortable about agreeing a scope for that in the absence of having the ability to take legal advice over how widely and whether some of those constraints associated with SIL take with it. Maybe I'm just being cautious about that, but I think we should take that in stages.
Yeah, I'm going to bring in Harvey, and then Phil, I think you had your hand up as well. Harvey?
Thank you. My interpretation of 3 was intended to was to cover that broader pitch and to bring that back to this group. So I was, and perhaps it's an oversight for not including it in the report, but those housing and employment sites I was always envisaged would be covered by 3. I know we haven't made it explicit, and that may be the issue here, but and it's also the way of how we have to work that through. So I suppose I was just really agreeing with Graham that we just want to work through the detail and bring that back to this group. But what the intention was from my perspective is to have that broader use of that funding in the way that Councillor Fuller outlined, but just to go through that process. So I'm comfortable either way. If you wish to change the recommendations, I still think we just need to work through that piece of work. And as indicated, we're on the path to doing that already. But I'm in your hands of how you want to record that today. Thank you.
I'll bring in Phil, then I'll just have a comment myself, and then bring in John. Phil. Yeah,
There are. It's a bad day. Andrew's proposed a tweak to recommendation 2. I've mentioned you could change recommendation 3, which is develop a model of borrowing, repayments and recycling, which has regard to the city deal to open up sites for housing and employment, of which Long Stratton is the first example of bringing forward that governance. So it could actually, recommendation 3 could be much more trying to explore that broader governance point in accordance with the city deal for recycling, and Long Stratton is the first example of drawing that up in detail.
Okay, thanks, Phil. I mean, I think that's fine, but I am keen that in the period between this meeting and the meeting at the end of September, there are some things we will want to just check out with the Treasury. I mean, it may be a very short conversation of validation, but we don't really want to put ourselves out on a limb if we haven't done that. I think that's something that's an important action point as well. And actually, it's something that we covered as an issue at our last meeting. John, are you getting close to being satisfied with?
Well, I'm satisfied, but I don't agree with Graham at all. Look, the agreement is before us. We don't need to go back to Treasury. The Treasury's given us the agreement. I've put it in the chat. Their words, not mine. The fund will be used to support infrastructure required to open up housing or employment development. There is no need to go and reopen this deal with anybody else. The deal is the deal. All I'm asking is that this recommendation today, good as far as it goes for today, but anticipating tomorrow, reflects the deal we signed. That's it. We don't need to go back. We can make the decision here and now with the comfort of a document that was signed by the Deputy Prime Minister. Andrew, I think you signed it as well, but in a different guise, and others as well. It is there. And for what it's worth, the LEP has been reusing recycled money free of tie or obligation for yonks, and they were parties to this deal as well. I mean, we're just making this incredibly more difficult than it needs to be.
Well, I think if what you say is true, John, there's no harm in an extremely short telephone conversation with the Treasury, which will be to say, yep, that's fine. And I think we would just want that assurance. And that's not delaying anything at all. That seems to me to be a sensible approach. Sean, did you want to come in?
Sorry, Alan. Apologies. I've had technology issues, so I was out of the meeting for a few minutes. So I'm not quite sure where you've got to. So I need to just catch back up. Last I heard, you were talking about changing the recommendation and inserting a new one, possibly at number 2, and moving number 2 down to number 3. But so I then lost connection, so I'm not quite sure where you've got to. So.
Okay, so there's some small iterations to make things more explicit. Where we are just at the moment is a discussion around just double checking with the Treasury that what we think was the situation in the signed 2013 City Deal Agreement, and what we want to do in terms of the investment model and the recycling fund will be fine. It may well be, but I think given, as I was saying, Sean, we had some conversation about some checks with the Treasury at our last meeting. I think that was an agreed action. So I think we should do that. And the fact is, we've got this report coming back. If we want to put some exemplifications in of the kind that have been described by Phil, by Andrew, by John, then we can get those bedded in a more precise way. But I'm not entirely seeing where there's a problem here. I think there's a very strong consensus around these recommendations, and if we need to tweak them, and Jackie will have made some notes on that, then that discussion I think can go on with officers. And we'll have the report back in 3 months' time.
Okay, thanks for that, Alan. Yeah, it comes back to that overarching principle that we are seeking here, which again John alluded to around the drawing down of the £20 million, the way in which it's used and invested, which again you're talking about the clarity side of things, just having that there, and then the ability to recycle as we move forward over the coming years as that fund is used and then reused. So I think there's a lot of work gone into this, and we've had a lot of conversations over a long period, and it's something we should now just look to take forward.
Yeah. John, did you want to come back in again on this? You're muted at the moment. Did you want to say something, John, or you're taking your hand down? You're fine. Okay. All right. Sorry. Misunderstood. Okay. So do we need? I think it's important that we just follow up those conversations with the conversation with the Treasury that we agreed at our last meeting as part of that's an action we've already effectively agreed to. Is there any amendment that we want to make at this stage to these three recommendations, or does it carry us forward and then they can be fleshed out and exemplified with the benefit of some clarity or confirmation from the Treasury at our meeting at the end of September? Andrew?
Well, probably as things stand, they're what we've actually agreed or agreeing to do, and then it'll be a further piece of work. So we come back in September with the governance and other issues around how the fund is recycled. So I think that's the action point I would suggest, and then the recommendations as is, or as presented on the papers rather, are accepted. If you want to add a fourth recommendation, you can always put that as the action point to come back. And that really covers it off. Otherwise, we could be trying to tweak something we can't actually tweak without affecting things unnecessarily.
I would agree with that. I think we've scooped this conversation out to the furthest extent, and we can put in a fourth action point if we need to, which is about to come back with sort of clarification or whatever, just to keep everybody happy. Is there some wording for another recommendation if we need one?
Well, you could say something along the lines of, bring back proposals to the board at its next meeting for the reuse or the utilisation of recycled funds, something like that.
Fine. Okay. Have we captured that? Okay. That I see a very large thumb up from John, so that's always good news. The wind's moving in the right direction. We happy with that approach? Thank you, Andrew. So that will be the additional recommendation 4. So with that agreed recommendation, are we all happy to proceed and move to the amended recommendations? That's
Yeah,
great.
agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Thanks very much. So I think we're done for today. Thank you very much, colleagues. Good to see you all.
We didn't
Enjoy
see
the
you,
rest
though.
of the
At least I didn't see you.
All right, take care.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Cheers.
Bye.